And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again to Bible study, our ongoing Bible study that we've been doing on Mondays and Wednesdays about this time. I'm glad to be able to welcome you into the parsonage office. Let's kind of sit around now here together and spend a little time together. And we're doing a topical study right now, and the difference between topical, there's the basic kinds of Bible studies are also like sermons. There are topical studies, there are textual studies, there are book studies, there are series that you can do. A topical study more or less takes a particular topic or idea and researches it then in terms of what do the scriptures have to say about that particular topic. A book study would be like we just finished going through the book of Acts, taking it talking about how Christians get it wrong we're talking about how young people perceive Christians nowadays and what turns them off in terms of Christianity. And we were talking about hypocrisy was one of the first things, being unkind, judgmental, those kinds of things that turn off young people. And so young adults, 18 to 35-year-olds, is basically the age range that we're talking about there. So when we're talking about how non-religious young people, they don't expect Christians to be perfect. Let's get that right out there. What they want, though, is for Christians to realize and understand that they are not perfect, and that to be willing to confess, to admit that we are imperfect, that we make mistakes, that we often fail to live up to our own expectations. But, it's like Jesus in the Gospel of John told the woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, he said, "Where are those that condemn you? Is there anyone here to condemn you?" And she said, "No one," because they had all left, because Jesus had humiliated them. And he said, "That's right, there's no one here, and neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." So the idea that Christians tend to be judgmental and just are very condemning in terms of acting like they're better than others, and "oh, you wretched sinner" type of deal, is totally wrong. That's one area where we get it wrong. We talk about hate the sin and love the sinner. That's one of the biggest hypocrisies that's out there. You'd be better off hating your own sin instead of somebody else's sin, because all of us have got enough sin to deal with as it is. So that's one area and way where Christians get it wrong. So let's talk about how Christians get it right when it comes down to that idea. When Christians are judgmental, hypocritical, insensitive, and mean-spirited, they are acting in a way that is totally and absolutely unchristian. That is not exhibiting the spirit or the servanthood of Jesus Christ. We are not being anything like the Master. Jesus really got into it with those kinds of people. The Apostle Paul, when he was trying to tell the Galatian church what they were supposed to be like, and he was really upset with the Galatian church because they had really strayed away from his original teaching. And in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, these are really, really important verses in the New Testament, because these tell us what Christians are supposed to be like. What is your life supposed to look like? And he says the fruit of the Spirit is, and this is what we're talking about, the fruit that your life is bearing out: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, generosity, faithfulness, and self-control. Those are the fruit of the Spirit. And Paul says if you have those things going on in your life, you're doing good. You're going to be all right. Now, In light of that, and in light of the rest of this particular series and the things that we will be talking about, let me make one thing very, very clear. Many Christians do get it right. I am not being condemning of or judgmental of a broad aspect of the church, of Christianity. It's just that people who do get it right are simply not as vocal as their counterparts, the people who get it wrong. And that's because these people are trying to be authentic and real in their Christian faith. They care about other people, they care for people, they are compassionate people. They live and they give sacrificially. They volunteer. They are encouragers. They work for justice and for peace. And they genuinely love people, all people. I know of one family back when another annual conference where I was serving, they were truck patch farmers. They lived right on the edge of the city limits, and they had a couple hundred acres, and they grew vegetables on them. He, the father, was a genius in terms of rigging up systems to make sure that the plants were watered and getting just all sorts of things. They grew the most amazing vegetables, and they sat on their place was right on a county road, fairly busy county road, and they had a 3-car garage, which they had converted into a vegetable shed, and it was a roadside stand, and people would just sometimes you couldn't find it was a big parking area. Sometimes you could not find a place to park to go in and buy vegetables. They were that busy, and their stuff was that good, that beautiful. They would sell to local grocery stores because again they were that good. And then whatever they didn't sell, they would sell themselves, and they never ever had any excess that I knew of. So they were making money hand over fist, but their home was an old farmhouse right there next to the 3-car garage that they used for their own vegetable stand, and they were they lived about as simple as anybody I've ever seen. They told me one time, because I was curious and I started asking questions. Being humble people, they were very reluctant to talk about it. But finally I found out they lived on 20% of what they made. And, they were very self-sustaining. They saved their own seed. They weren't buying seed. They were very organic in terms of their fertilizers and stuff like that. So they lived very simply. They lived on 20% of what they made. They had a pot-belly stove that he had piped into, he had jerry-rigged into the various rooms of the house, and, with fans and stuff, and that's how they heated the house. Wood burner. He cut his own wood. He had, a woods back there, and they gave 80% of what they made, 80%, to various missions and charities and the church. And they gave a big chunk of change to the church. And he said, all of them, it was the 2 of them and a daughter, they basically were, in terms of their truck patch farming operation, they were serving the Lord. They were funding, I don't remember how many missionaries and mission projects, as well as projects and programs through the local church. And they had a gift for, number one, making money. They had a gift for living simply, and they had a gift for giving sacrificially. If the church ever had a need, they were the first ones that the church would go to, and they wanted it that way. They had that kind of an understanding with their local church, which happened to be the church that I was serving. And so these are characteristics of people that are getting it right. Now, not does everybody supposed to live that way? No. But Paul is talking about the fruit of the Spirit and various spiritual gifts. And these people had been gifted to be able to live that way. They were motivated to live that way, to be those kinds of people. And they were just delightful people. These were people that were getting it right. I can give you lots of other examples of people who get it right. I can also, though, give you a lot of examples of people who get it wrong, and that's what we're talking about here. So when Christians are getting it right, they love, they give, they work for justice, they work for peace, they demonstrate kindness. When Christians get it right, they are more and more like Jesus Christ. They are little Christ. In other words, that's what Christian literally means, to be a little Christ, to be like Christ. And when you're like Jesus, you will draw people to you. When you get it wrong, you might draw people who are, birds of a feather flock together, but the people who are really people in need, who need the message of Christ, you're not going to gather them to you. You're just going to alienate them. They're going to drive them away. And I don't want to be a part of that. I just don't. I don't want to be part of that. So that's what it looks like when Christians get it right in terms of that type of thing. Now, that takes us now to the second aspect of this particular study, when Christians get it wrong. And we're going to talk about Christians, science, and politics. Oh, no, not politics. Yeah, we're going to get into that one too. Let's talk about the science part of it though first. There has always been friction between the church, Christianity, and science. It's always been there. You look at the great mathematician, astronomer Copernicus, who was just before, he died just before the times of Galileo. Copernicus was the one who mathematically proved that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, that the sun was, but Copernicus made sure that none of his works, none of his findings were to be published until after he died, because he knew that this would cause an uproar in the church, and they would come after him. And as it was, after his works were published, after his death, they burned his works anyway. I think they exhumed his body and burned it in effigy, at the stake after he was long gone. That's getting pretty doggone crude, but he knew that the church would have a problem with that. The reason the church had a problem with that, is that there are a couple of stories in the Old Testament where it talks about how Gideon, for example, and I believe it was also Joshua, who also King Hezekiah, where God told and forced the sun to go backwards. And people took that implication to mean that means that the sun revolves around the earth, not the earth around the sun. And to say anything that was otherwise, that the sun actually that the earth went around the sun, was basically denying what the Bible was teaching, and therefore was heresy and blasphemy. And that could get you burned at the stake. Galileo, a few years later, he wasn't quite as smart as Copernicus, because he published these findings and this idea while he was still alive. He was declared a heretic. He was forced to recant under force, forced to. Torture was the threat there. And he was also placed under house arrest so that he couldn't go out and spread these heretical, blasphemous ideas. So the church, when it comes to science, has been getting it wrong right from the very beginning. Now, today, we'd like to say we know better. But do we really? What else do Christians and Christianity battle over when it comes to science? Well, there are similar things here. Christians' attitude towards science bothers a lot of young people, young adults. Those who are not churchgoers, it bothers them a lot. The discoveries that have to do with geologists about the age of the earth. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that will tell you that according to the adding up the biblical genealogies, and Bishop Ussher was the one who came up with this. He decided that the world was the creation date for the world is 4004 BC. That's when the world began. And geologists will tell you the earth is actually tens of millions of years old. And so there are a lot of Christians out there, conservative ones, who believe that the whole idea of geology and the age of the earth is heretical. They don't agree with it. One reason for that is fear. Christians, I think, forever have been afraid that science will debunk and disprove what they believe. They fear the more people know and believe about science, the less that they're going to believe in God. And with the faith, they believe that science is actually intentionally engaged in the idea of destroying the Christian faith. They think that science leaves absolutely no room for faith, for God. And they figure, man, if you let the camel get his nose under the tent, it won't be long before the whole camel is inside the tent. But I believe science is absolutely no threat to Christianity. I don't think God is threatened by science. It's kind of like the old story where the scientists of the world got together and they decided that they knew as much as God, they could do as much as God could do. They really didn't need God anymore, so they arranged for a meeting with God, and they told him that, God, we really don't need you anymore because we can do everything that you do. And God said, oh, really? Is that so? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's have a contest. Let's each make a human being. I'll go first. And God took a handful of dirt and fashioned it, blew into it the breath of life, and behold, you had a living, breathing soul of a human being. And the scientists said, we can do that. So they went to reach down to get a handful of dirt, and God said, no, go get your own dirt. Okay, so you always have to keep coming back to the whole question of origins. I mean, science can go back so far and they can ask as many questions as they want, but eventually you have to come down to the question of origins. Where did this all begin? And so God isn't threatened by science at all. In fact, I think the more that science discovers and more we know about the universe, the more I'm in awe of the Creator. Light, for example, from our solar system is part of what's known as the Milky Way. That's our galaxy. The galaxy that is the closest neighbor to the Milky Way is the Andromeda galaxy. And it takes the light from the Andromeda galaxy over 2 million years to reach our eyes here on Earth. Traveling at the speed of light, 2 million years to get from the Andromeda galaxy here to us in the Milky Way. And I say, okay, well, that makes me think of Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens are telling the glory of God. Who am I, O Lord, that you should be mindful of me when we've got all of this amazing glory? And yet you can look outward and it's amazing. Look inward and it's equally amazing. The scripture says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am weak and frail, and yet at the same time I am strong and resilient. You look at the human body and the whole way it's put together, and if you can tell me after looking at the inward parts of the human body and everything that goes together and makes it up and makes it function perfectly, if you can't see intelligent design there, then something I'd like to try whatever it is you're smoking, if it's peyote or whatever the case may be, because just the very fact that I am able to sit here and lead this study, and everything within me that is working the way it is that allows me to do that, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And the fact that we have discovered this machine that can transmit to you everything that I'm saying, as long as the internet stream stays strong. And thank you, internet people, for maintaining that, because it doesn't always happen all the time. But when I was born 69 years ago in 1951, science was just beginning to scratch the surface of the whole idea of computers. And the first computer that was made, I believe, was by IBM. It took a whole warehouse to house one computer. And it could only do the most basic rudimentary stuff. And now, remember when we put the first man on the moon in 1969 with Neil Armstrong and the boys? There is now, and all the computers that NASA had that were working all that out and making it happen and making sure everybody was on site and getting to where they needed to be, because you can't just take aim at the moon and shoot. You gotta go, have your spacecraft go where the moon is going to be, not where it is now, because the sucker is moving. We're all moving in space. It takes a lot of science and calculations to be able to figure that out. There's now more computing power in my cell phone than all of NASA had for that original moonshot. And that has all happened within the last 50 years. 50 years, in one sense, is a lifetime for me, but in the whole course of human history and human events, it's a drop in the bucket. God is the one who has developed the most brilliant computer of all, the brain, and has allowed it this sense of curiosity and inventiveness, ingenuity. It's just amazing. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that just makes me more and more in awe of God than threatening any idea about God and whether or not God exists. Now, as I said before, there are some Christians who believe in what's called the young earth idea in terms of the creation of the world. Some think that the world is less than 10,000 years old. A lot of those people belong to what's called the Young Earth Society. And the problem is that they're looking at the book of Genesis, and we've talked about this before in making sense of the Bible. They look at the book of Genesis, the first few chapters, as a science lesson, as a science book. This is how creation happened, boom, 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 boom. And those creation stories, from my perspective, my way of understanding them, is that those stories were not written as a science lesson. The people who originally wrote down those stories, they knew absolutely nothing about science, and that's not why. And it wasn't written as a physics lesson either, or anything else. There was no science really involved in the writing of the stories. They are written to show the magnificence of the Creator. They point us to God, and the question isn't so much, how did God create? The question is, the fact is, God did create, because I'm here right now. As Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. I'm here now. God created me. That's the fact. How he did, going all the way back to origins, don't know, don't really care. I just know that he did. And he has done an absolutely magnificent job of it. And as we continue to develop and research in science, and we begin to answer more and more of those how questions, I think the ultimate question still becomes, why? Why did God create? Well, God created because it's his nature, and he created out of a sense of love for us. So science does not threaten my faith in God. It simply magnifies it. The more I know and learn, the more I am in awe of the Creator. That takes us back to then the whole idea. When you think of Christianity versus science, one of the first things that's going to come to mind for you, for most people, is going to be evolution, which goes back to the whole idea of the Scopes monkey trials, which took place in Dayton, Tennessee, back in July, a hot July, 1925. In March of that year, the Tennessee state legislature made it illegal to teach anything that contradicted the biblical creation story. Imagine that. The state legislature said you can't do that. No, no evolution. And one teacher said, not going to comply with that, and he continued to teach science. And so he was arrested and charged. Now, the attorney for the prosecution was not content to let the local prosecuting attorney take care of this, because Clarence Darrow was brought in for the defense, and he was a big-time criminal defense lawyer out of Chicago. And so they brought in William Jennings Bryant, who is a renowned Christian, many times over candidate for the presidency, sworn advocate of the silver standard, the great silver-tongued orator, the great orator himself, was brought in as to be part of the prosecution. And the prosecution won. The teacher was found guilty. John Scopes was his name. And the constitutionality of that state law was upheld clear up until 1967. Wow. But Bryant won the case, but he lost in the court of public opinion because Darrow succeeded in making him look kind of ridiculous. But the law was the law, and the law rested on the point of, did John Scopes violate or break the law? It wasn't whether or not the law was valid or not. It's whether did he break it or not. But many Christians believe in what is called intelligent design. I referred to that a few minutes back. In other words, God has designed everything in creation down to you and me, set it in motion, and he guides the process. Just look at the development of a human being. From the time that we are conceived, as we develop 9 months in the womb, as we are born, a helpless baby and needing the care of parents, to the point where we become a young adult. We look at a young person that maybe we haven't seen in a couple of years, and one of the first things we say, "Oh my, how you have grown, how you have changed." And that's a great thing until you start to get into your 30s and 40s, and all of a sudden you look in the mirror one day and you go, "Oh my, how you have changed. I do not know this person. What happened to the young and beautiful 18-year-old?" I saw a picture of myself at age 18 here not too long ago. A friend of mine passed away, and as part of the obituary and the eulogy, we played on the same basketball team in college. They published the team picture that had both him and I in there, as well as the rest of our teammates, from November. It was in November or October. It might have been October of 1969. I had just turned 18, and I looked at that and I'm going, "Oh, that hurts so bad." But how we change. Amazing. You see a picture of yourself from first grade, how we change. That's all. That didn't happen by accident. That's all intelligent design. That's God working in and through. He started the process. He oversees it, allows it to happen. So, I tend to go along with that. Look at it this way. Henry Ford designed the automobile assembly line. Didn't exist before he brought it into appearance, and which meant that Ford approved the design of every car that came out of there, and thousands of cars would come off that assembly line. His name is on every one of those cars, every one of them. They are his design. Millions upon tens of millions of Ford automobiles have been built. But Henry Ford did not personally build a one of them, but he is personally responsible for each one of them. So think of creation like that. God created the plan and the process for the progression of life on this world, and each species is individually crafted with unlimited potential. You know, your potential is limited only by how much you limit yourself. That's not a cliche, that's not a trite ism, that's the truth. And we have this unlimited potential, not only as individuals, but as a species, as to what we can become. Science, I believe, helps us understand the physical process of our existence, and it's not a threat. It's not a threat to genuine faith. It's not a threat at all. Science shows us how the universe works. And theology and faith, well, they teach us what our existence means. Science asks the questions what and how. Theology and faith seek to answer the why and for what purpose. Science can't answer those questions, the questions of ultimate meaning. We don't use a screwdriver to paint a wall. That would be, pretty bad news. We don't use science to answer questions of purpose and meaning. And that's why we run into trouble when we try to use the Bible to answer scientific questions. It's the wrong tool for the job. It was never intended to do that. So, that's why Christians get it wrong when they try to use the book of Genesis as a science book. If you look in the wrong place for something, you're not going to find it. Genesis is a poetic narrative of creation. It's a creedal statement. It is a faith statement. It is a hymn. It's not a science book. Never was intended to be. Genesis never was intended to teach us how God created, but that God created. It's written in a very deliberate, dramatic, and vivid language. It is meant to stir the soul in terms of its magnificence. In the beginning, God created. It teaches us that, number one, there is a God, and that creation is God's good gift. It shows us the characteristics of God. It shows us that we are created in God's image, that we have the capacity to love, to think, to reason, to make moral decisions, to act as co-creators with God. And the more we learn on about how and what questions of science, I think the deeper your faith can go. The two of them are not mutually exclusive or threatening to one another. And when Christians begin to think that they are, that's where they get it wrong. This is not letting the camel get his nose under the tent. This is common sense, really. Don't try to make the Bible into something that it is not. The book of Genesis is not a science book. Stop it. Just stop it right now. Now, we're talking about Christianity and science. We also said a part of that was about Christianity and politics. But I've run out of time for today. So that's as far as we're going to go. We will get into that one next time, which will be next Monday, about 2 o'clock or so. So in the meantime, thanks for stopping by for some time together. I hope the Lord's blessing you real good.